Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the ranking member for holding this hearing. Mr. Stumpf, thank you for being willing to appear today. Appreciate your forthright testimony. You know, I've been a customer of your company, and I've admired your company, and I've used your company as an example for my own businesses in the past 20 years in developing what I thought were best practices and goal setting for retail bankers across the businesses that I was associated with in the 1990s and the 2000s. And during that period of what's happened recently, I've recommended your company as a company to do business with and a stock to own. So that comes with a pretty heavy burden for me. I have the same knot in my stomach that you probably have.
Yeah.
Because in my view, as a former person who's worked in finance on and off for 35 years, this just isn't a one-off situation down in the Los Angeles basin that Wells Fargo is struggling with. It really is a systemic compliance failure inside the, I assume, principally the retail portion of the bank. And I know that it's a huge frustration for those of us on this committee and for your members of your board and your management team, and very hurtful to the customers that have been damaged by it, their reputations, their credit potentially, including the 903 people in Arkansas that have been affected by this. That resulted in 4 people who apparently worked for you in Arkansas that were fired as a part of the sweep across your company. So you've told us today about line management between you and the branch manager, many layers, branch managers, regional managers, area managers that report up, I assume, to Carrie Tolstedt, who's been discussed today. Is that generally right?
Yes, there's a new leader now in that retail banking business. Her name is Mary Mack, and she's now in charge of that organization.
And did Carrie report to Tim Sloan or report to you?
She reported to me until maybe about a year ago or so. I don't recall the exact date, but then she reported to Mr. Sloan after that.
And the credit card issue, I assume, doesn't report to her. Does that report to the consumer lending executive or to the community bank?
There's a relationship there, but it reports in someplace else. That's
okay,
right.
So it's a matrix management to the retail side, but through the consumer lending channel is where credit cards?
I would describe it this way, that the retail bank would talk to customers, and then they would send the request over to the credit card group, which they would do the underwriting and fulfillment.
And all those people that I named all sat on your operating committee of management. And how often does that group meet? And is it by teleconference?
No.
Or is it face-to-face?
It's largely face-to-face. It's every Monday.
Every Monday. And so unrelated to the board, which is boards meet just, I think you said 9. In 2015, you had 9 meetings of the board.
That was 8, but it might have been 9. But
yeah, and you had 14 meetings of the audit committee during 2015, according to your proxy. But that operating committee meets every Monday. So the one question I have is, do you remember this being talked about at that operating level when line managers bring their top concerns to you? And was it in this same time frame? It wasn't until maybe 2 years after this was really manifesting itself in Los Angeles.
Yeah, it was being managed within the business.
Yep.
In 2011. Each business has their own corporate or their own compliance, their own sales efficacy and so forth. So it was brought out of the sales part into the lines control function. And then by 2012, they were reducing goals. By 2013 is where we brought the corporate resources in, like corporate human resources, corporate investigations and so forth, because we saw a spike in that right. behavior.
So now your lead director, Steve Sanger, who's the former CEO of General Mills, is conducting an independent investigation that he's hired independent of the corporation. He's hired his own resources. And that's commenced recently. Is that right?
As I understand it, Steve Sanger, as our lead director, along with the other independent directors, have hired counsel, and they are doing their investigation.
When do you expect they'll finish their work?
I'm not part of that process, so I don't know, but I know they're going to do a full comprehensive review.
I hope that that gets released to the public once the board has seen it and reviewed it, and that it could be posted out on your website, because I think that sort of independent view renews confidence in the corporate governance system, and I would encourage that to be done. You know, when I was at the Treasury Department in 1990-91, we had a little problem in the government securities business, and your largest shareholder, Mr. Buffett, became the CEO of Salomon Brothers in the midst of that crisis, and Salomon Brothers was found guilty of manipulating the U.S. Treasury market at that time. Have you talked to Mr. Buffett about this or sought his advice on this matter you're facing?
I have talked to a lot of our investors, and I've had one conversation with Warren Buffett.
Because Warren Buffett, in 2 minutes before the Senate Banking Committee in 1991, probably did the best job, I think, on behalf of corporate America. Do you remember what he said at that time?
I've read a lot of his things. I think there was something about, you know, I'd rather make less money and about integrity. But go ahead and read it to me. I don't remember that testimony.
Well, I'm going to paraphrase it. He said, first of all, he wanted every employee to be their own compliance officer, his or her own compliance officer, and he wanted every employee every day when they came to work to think about the actions they took on behalf of customers, that they could read that in their own hometown newspaper written by a critical journalist. Yeah. But he summarized it, and what I think you need to summarize if you're going to be successful in this endeavor. He made this quote, which I think people have quoted now for 25 years: lose money for the firm and I will be understanding.
Yep.
Lose a shred of reputation for the firm and I will be ruthless.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to refer to, and that's what I remember from that, and I agree with him.
Well, that's where we are, because I agree with my colleagues. This is hurting the ability of the banking industry to do consultative selling. Something that we all pride ourselves on in financial services is that we seek to understand the needs of our customers and try to meet them. And this damage by what's happened at Wells Fargo is going to hurt that effort on behalf of community banks all over this country, and cause sweep investigations of incentive sales programs and cross-selling programs or consultative selling, which is really what we're talking about. But I hope that we will also ask our regulators where they were at this time. The OCC clearly had a needs to improve rating for you in compliance and some intensive work you were doing over those 2 years, but I see no evidence so far that the CFPB, which actually has the statutory obligation to be engaged here, was taking action. So last thing I'll ask you about is Mr. Himes talked about materiality. And in any one quarter, accountants and lawyers and bean counters and companies in your finance department tell you what's material and what's not. But we see sometimes the trees for the forest in that situation. And you've got the ability, and your board has that ability, to address that in the chairman's letter to your shareholders. You don't need a lawyer to tell you what to write in your chairman's letter. And when you spend 50% in fines and penalties of your net income over a 3, 4, 5-year period, that's material. $10 billion compared to $22 billion. It's a big deal, no matter how many small bites at the apple that it comes in. And I hope in your 2016 letter to shareholders that you and your lead director, Mr. Sanger, will address what I think is a systemic failure in a few areas of Wells Fargo that's tarnished this beautiful almost 2-century reputation of your country, of your company. And with that, I yield the balance of my time to Mr. Ginta from New Hampshire.